Today, we're plunging into a really fascinating text, one that feels, well, surprisingly relevant, even though it's centuries old.
Huh. You mean Charles McKay's extraordinary popular delusions and the madness of crowds?
That's the one. It gives this incredible overview of human folly, you know, how easily we get swept up in things together.
Yeah, often with pretty wild results.
Absolutely. So our mission today is basically to use McKay as our guide. We want to look at some of these truly strange historical moments.
Especially the financial ones, right?
Exactly. Focusing on how this tendency plays out when when the pursuit of wealth gets involved.
And see how those historical examples might kind of help us understand the world we're in now with all the information and, perceived value flying around.
Precisely. McKay's core idea, which he lays out pretty early on, is that, well, the specific things we obsess over might change.
Sure, the details differ across history.
Right. But the underlying scale of it, the nature of human irrationality when we're in a crowd, he says that stays remarkably constant.
So he saw parallels between the historical stuff he wrote about and things happening in his own time.
Yeah, and he strongly suggests we can look back and find echoes in our world, too.
And he really zooms in on financial manias, doesn't he, as prime examples of this collective.
No.
Well, madness.
He does. He argues that things like the Mississippi Scheme or the South Sea Bubble, they weren't just random events.
They were symptoms, kind of deeper recurring human behaviors around wealth and speculation.
Yeah. What's interesting is his view that this madness isn't just like an occasional bug in the system.
More like a fundamental feature of how crowds behave under certain conditions.
Exactly. Especially when that lure of getting rich quick takes hold.
Okay, so it sounds like we're in for some bizarre stories.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
So get ready to uncover some truly wild but true tales. Try to understand the forces McKay saw behind this madness of crowds.
And hopefully, get some perspective on all the financial noise and ideas about value that surround us today.
Right, let's dive right into the financial core of McKay's examples, starting with two huge classic speculative bubbles.
Okay.
First up, the Mississippi Scheme over in France. This was masterminded by a guy named John Law.
Ah, John Law. Yeah, he had this really ambitious plan, right, involving paper money.
Exactly. Issued by his company, the Mississippi Company. And it was all linked to these supposed vast riches waiting in French territories in America.
And the French government at the time was, well, pretty desperate financially.
Totally. They saw Law's scheme as a potential way out from under this crushing national debt.
So they embraced it.
Big time. The source says Law's scheme raised something like 180 million livres, supposedly to pay off debt. But McKay points out only about 80 million actually went to that. The rest, a massive 100 million.
Just vanish,
Or, as McKay puts it, it kind of fell into the hand of the courtiers.
Ah, so not exactly helping the national balance sheet.
Not really. And the public knew it, apparently. McKay says people murmured very much about how this money, taken from so-called peculators, people who'd profited corruptly before, was being used.
They felt it was unjust, like robbing one group of corrupt officials just to enrich another.
Yeah, rob one set of rogues to fatten another. That's the quote McKay uses.
So what happened next? This must have set the stage for something big.
Oh, it did. What followed was just an incredible speculative frenzy. McKay describes basically everyone, high society, low society, suddenly obsessed with visions of getting rich from this company's stock.
Like everyone got sucked in.
He says almost every single person of note, except for like 2 individuals, got involved, plus people of every age, sex, and condition. It was nationwide.
Wow. And the center of this was that street, right?
The Rue de Quincampoix,
Yeah.
which sounds like it was totally unsuitable, just this narrow street, tacked constantly.
The tremendous pressure of the crowd, as he puts it.
Exactly. And get this. Houses on that street, their rents went through the roof, from maybe 1,000 livres a year to 12, even 16,000.
Just because of location. Because that's where the trading was.
Purely.
Yeah.
Basic rental space becoming insanely valuable just because it offered access. It's wild.
McKay uses some great little stories to illustrate this, doesn't he?
He does, like the cobbler. Usually made, 30 or 40 sous a day? Suddenly he's making 200 livres a day, just renting out his stall and, paper and ink.
Incredible. And wasn't there a story about a hunchback?
Yes. A man literally renting out his hump as a sort of portable writing desk for speculators in the street. Made a small fortune doing it.
It's almost comical, but it really shows how detached from reality things got. Value was just warped by the frenzy itself.
And the market reflected that volatility. Shares could jump 10 or 20% in the course of a few hours.
So people really could wake up poor and go to bed rich.
Absolutely. McKay says people went to bed in affluence after starting the day with nothing.
But it wasn't all just numbers on paper, was it? McKay points out the downsides.
Definitely not. These intense crowds, all this quick money floating around. It led to constant riots and disturbances. Robberies were happening daily.
People carrying huge sums in paper money, I guess.
Right. And assassinations became frequent, too.
Like that Count Dorn case he details.
Yeah, that's a grim one. A young nobleman, quite dissolute, from a really high-ranking family, he and some accomplices decided to rob a wealthy broker.
In a pub, wasn't it? A cabaret?
Right. There was a struggle. The broker got stabbed, died. 2 of them were caught, including the count.
And they were sentenced to be broken on the wheel. A pretty brutal punishment.
Very. And McKay describes how all their powerful relatives swarmed the regent's palace, begging for mercy, trying to use their influence.
But the regent held firm.
He did. Refused to commute the sentence. He basically said their high status made the crime worse, not better.
And he quoted Corneille, the playwright.
Yeah. Le crime fait la honte, et non pas l'échafaud. Crime brings the shame, not the scaffold.
McKay includes that to show the social breakdown, right? The grim consequences beyond just financial loss.
Exactly. The pursuit of quick, dodgy gains had real, violent outcomes.
And meanwhile, the whole financial scheme was heading for collapse.
Totally. Law had just flooded the country with paper money, based upon no solid foundation, as McKay says.
So they tried to fix it.
They tried. Things like reducing the value of the notes or raising the value of gold and silver coins to try and equalize things. But it caused chaos.
Wasn't there one really controversial edict?
Yeah, May 21st. It suddenly cut the value of the paper notes in half.
Ouch. How did that go down?
Terribly. The Parliament refused to even register it. The public outcry was so immediate and so furious.
They had to cancel it.
Yep, reversed within 7 days.
Yeah.
But the damage was done. Faith was shattered.
And the public anger turned on Law himself.
Oh, yeah. His carriage was attacked. His wife and daughter were assaulted on the street. He needed Swiss guards.
Wow.
Ended up having to hide out in the regent's apartments in the Palais Royal.
So it shows how quickly that adoration, based on the illusion of wealth, can flip to violent anger when the bubble bursts.
Exactly. The belief just evaporated because, well, the real value wasn't there.
Okay, so that's the Mississippi scheme. Now, fast forward just a few years, hop across the channel to Britain.
And you'll land right in the middle of the South Sea bubble.
Which McKay calls the greatest example in British history of the infatuation for commercial gambling, at least until the railway mania much later.
Yeah, and the fallout from this one was massive, too. Widespread corruption revealed.
The parliamentary inquiry afterwards uncovered, what did McKay call it? Infamy and disgraceful scenes.
And the company's treasurer, a guy named Knight, he did a runner, right?
He did. Fled to Calais, taking the company's books and crucial documents with him, trying to cover tracks, presumably.
The reaction in Parliament sounds pretty dramatic.
Intense. They literally locked the doors, set up a committee of secrecy.
And their findings were damning.
Absolutely. They said they'd found a train of the deepest villainy and fraud that hell had ever contrived to ruin a nation. Strong words.
Wow. So they went after the directors.
Immediately. Secured them, seized their papers, even summoned directors who were actual members of Parliament themselves.
And they put a bounty on Knight.
Yep. £2,000 reward.
Hmm.
This wasn't just seen as bad business. It was viewed as a deliberate fraud, an attack on the country driven by greed.
And the effort to bring Knight back.
Yeah.
That got complicated, didn't it?
Yeah, it's a fascinating legal side story. He was caught near Liège in what's now Belgium.
But he didn't get sent back to Britain right away.
No, he claimed some kind of special legal privilege in the region of Brabant, arguing he had to be tried there, not extradited.
And the local authorities agreed.
They did. They upheld his claim. So while the British government was trying to navigate that legal mess,
He escaped.
he escaped from the citadel of Antwerp. Just vanished again.
Incredible. McKay includes that detail, I guess, to show how hard it was to actually hold powerful people accountable, even with clear evidence. Jurisdictions, privilege.
Exactly. Accountability could be really slippery.
And during the peak of the South Sea madness, before it all crashed, the number of new companies popping up was insane.
Oh, McKay lists some truly absurd ones.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Okay, let's see. Companies for improving malt liquors, for Grand American Fishery, for trading in the River Orinoco. The list goes on.
But the most famous one, the one that really captures the absurdity.
Ah, you mean the one for carrying on an undertaking of great advantage, but nobody to know what it is.
That's it. People actually invested money based only on a vague promise of profit, with zero idea what the business actually was.
It perfectly shows how completely detached from reality the whole thing became. It wasn't about investing in a business anymore.
It was pure hype, pure speculation, believing someone else would pay more later for nothing tangible.
Yeah, perceived value built entirely on air.
Okay, so we've hit these massive stock market bubbles, but McKay's point is that this kind of collective delusion isn't just about stocks and shares.
No, definitely not. And Tulipomania in Holland is probably the most famous example of that, right? Where perceived value went completely off the rails.
Totally disconnected from what you normally call intrinsic value.
So the tulip arrives in Europe mid-16th century or so.
And pretty quickly becomes a huge status symbol, especially the rare varieties.
Right. And just like the stock bubbles, this rage, as McKay calls it, started with the wealthy.
But then it spread.
Spread to the middle classes. And that's when prices went absolutely preposterous.
He gives that example of a trader, right? Paying half his fortune for one bulb.
Yeah, one half of his fortune for a single root. And not even necessarily to flip it for profit.
Just to have it.
Just to own it, keep it in his conservatory, admire it. That shows the intensity of the desire.
And the stories McKay tells around this are just bonkers.
Completely, like the sailor.
Oh yeah, the sailor who found what he thought was an onion on the docks.
But it was actually a super valuable tulip root, an Admiral van der Eyck worth like 4,000 florins.
And he just ate it with his herring.
Yep. Mistook it for an onion, ate it for lunch. The owner finds out, and the poor sailor gets thrown in jail for felony.
That's crazy. And there was another one with an English botanist.
Right. Visiting Holland, sees a tulip root on display, thinks it's just an unusual type of onion.
And decides to dissect it for science.
Exactly. Starts peeling it, cutting it up. The Dutch owner comes in, sees this.
And presumably freaks out.
Totally. McKay quotes him shouting something like, 100,000 duivel. It's an Admiral van der Eyck. Basically, 100,000 devils.
Yeah, and the botanist ends up
thrown in prison, too, until he could somehow arrange security for the massive supposed value of the bulb he'd just destroyed.
These stories sound almost funny now, but McKay uses them brilliantly.
Yeah, to hammer home his point from the introduction. The value here had nothing to do with the bulb itself being particularly useful or edible, clearly.
It was purely about rarity, desirability, collective belief among collectors, and the public.
A bubble built entirely on belief and desire, which meant when that belief finally popped.
Poof. The collapse was sudden and total. Value vanished overnight.
Now, McKay also brings in other figures, not involved in market bubbles exactly, but still driven by this intense desire for wealth, like the Alchemists.
Right. Another angle on the same theme. The human drive for riches, sometimes tipping into, fantastical beliefs or even outright scams.
Their main goal, obviously, was the search for the philosopher's stone.
The magic bullet to turn cheap metals like lead into gold. The ultimate get-rich-quick scheme.
And McKay shares anecdotes about various characters linked to this quest. Pietro de Pone, for instance.
What was his story?
Claimed he could make gold using summoned spirits, and that the gold would magically return to him even if you tried to hide it.
Sounds legit. How did that end?
He ended up being tried by the Inquisition. Didn't go well. Then there's Raymond Lully.
Rumored to have actually made gold. In the Tower of London, no less.
So the stories went. But then you get darker examples, too.
Like the Maréchal de Rays you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. A French nobleman who apparently wasted his entire huge fortune chasing alchemical dreams.
Manipulated by an accomplice, right?
An Italian named Prelati, who was basically just stringing him along, extracting valuables while pretending to help him make gold. And McKay connects this obsessive, deluded quest for wealth directly to de Rays' downfall. Right, which involved horrific accusations about disappearing children, leading to his trial and execution by burning. It's a chilling example of how destructive that belief in a magical shortcut to riches could become.
And then there are figures like the Count of Saint-Germain, Cagliostro.
Yeah, these more flamboyant characters known for, incredible jewels showing off immense wealth.
Saint-Germain apparently showed Madame de Pompadour diamonds worth 500,000 livres, claimed he could pull gems from the earth.
Sold elixirs, claimed mystical knowledge. Both he and Cagliostro got tangled up in major scandals of the time, like the Queen's necklace affair in France.
McKay basically paints them as charlatans, right? Empirics, alchemists, swindlers, using grand claims to deceive people and get rich.
Exactly. So even though it's not a public market bubble, it's still part of McKay's bigger picture.
The intense human desire for wealth and power, combined with our willingness to believe in the fantastical or fall for deception.
It leads to these extraordinary acts of folly, and sometimes much worse. It's another dimension of that madness he's exploring.
So if we zoom out even further, McKay doesn't just stop with financial stuff or gold making.
No, his scope is much wider. He's got whole chapters on things like prophecies, fortune-telling.
Even witch mania, admiration of great thieves, ghouls.
Right. He includes all these because he sees them as different facets of the same basic human tendency.
Getting swept up in popular beliefs, believing things that seem unbelievable in hindsight, mass hysteria.
Exactly. The witch mania sections are particularly stark examples.
Yeah, he talks about thousands executed just in Scotland, based on flimsy accusations, often confessions extracted through torture.
And the methods of the so-called witch finders, like Matthew Hopkins in England. The swimming test, the stool watching.
Believing flies were demons in disguise. It's terrifying.
And Hopkins himself apparently met his end via his own swimming test. Grim irony.
But it shows how collective belief, when driven by fear and superstition instead of greed, can be just as powerful and destructive.
It's a different kind of madness, maybe, but the crowd dynamic, that suspension of critical thought, it feels chillingly similar to the financial manias.
So it really reinforces McKay's main thesis. This madness of crowds is a powerful, pervasive force. It shapes human behavior in all sorts of ways, not just in markets.
Definitely.
So let's bring it back. What does this whole deep dive into McKay's world actually mean for you listening today? How do these old stories help us make sense of our time?
Well, McKay himself saw parallels between the past and his own era, right? And if we use his lens, we can absolutely see them today, too. By understanding the mechanics of those past manias. You know, the speculative frenzy, how perceived value can just completely swamp any idea of intrinsic value.
The power of rumor, how crowd behavior takes over.
Exactly. And the sudden, often devastating collapse when the belief system fails. Understanding that framework helps you recognize similar patterns now.
In modern financial markets, maybe? Investment trends?
Sure, or even broader cultural things where value seems based more on hype and collective excitement than on, actual substance.
It's about maybe developing a better antenna for the signs, like spotting irrational exuberance or panic.
Yeah, and recognizing how easily collective belief can be, manufactured and spread, especially now with the speed information travels.
It's a good reminder, too, isn't it? That deep human desire for quick wealth, or status, or even just the fear of missing out.
FOMO, yeah.
It can easily override our rational judgment, just like it did for those speculators crammed into the Rue de Quincampoix.
Or the Dutch pouring their savings into tulip bulbs centuries ago. These aren't just dusty old tales.
They're kind of like blueprints, aren't they? For understanding human nature when faced with perceived opportunity and that buzz of collective excitement.
Well put.
So we've taken quite a deep dive into McKay's extraordinary look at popular delusions and the madness of crowds.
We have, from that financial frenzy on the streets of Paris
to the bizarre world of tulipomania.
And even touching on the often dark quest for gold by the alchemists.
We've seen the incredible power of collective belief and the timeless, sometimes frankly frightening nature of human folly, especially when we're chasing riches.
And what's really striking, I think, isn't just the weirdness of the past stories.
It's how clearly you can see the patterns echoing through history, how they resonate today, even if the details are different.
Absolutely. So the final thought for you, as you navigate the world today, processing information, looking at investments, seeing value seemingly created out of thin air and then destroyed.
Ask yourself, where do I see the madness of crowds playing out around me right now?